The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to his disciples, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, escorted by all the angels, then he will take his seat on his throne of glory. All the nations will be assembled before him, and he will separate men one from another, as the shepherd separates sheep from goats. He will place the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, 'Come, you whom my Father has blessed, take your heritage, the kingdom prepared for you since the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you made me welcome. Naked, and you clothed me. Sick, and you visited me. In prison, and you came to see me.' Then the virtuous will say to him in reply, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and make you welcome, naked and clothe you, sick or in prison, and go to see you?' And the king will answer, 'I tell you solemnly, insofar as you did it to one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did it to me.' Next he will say to those on his left hand, 'Go away from me with your curse upon you, to the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you never gave me food. I was thirsty, and you never gave me anything to drink. I was a stranger, and you never made me welcome. Naked, and you never clothed me. Sick and in prison, and you never visited me.' Then it will be their turn to ask, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, a stranger or naked, sick or in prison, and did not come to your help?' Then he will answer, 'I tell you solemnly, insofar as you neglected to do it to one of the least of these, you neglected to do it to me.' And they will go away to eternal punishment, and the virtuous to eternal life." The Gospel of the Lord. That passage comes at the end of the 5 central sections of Matthew's Gospel. Remember, we've been looking at that over the last year. Each section represents, not necessarily exactly corresponding to, but the 5 books of the Torah presenting Jesus as the new Moses. And outside those 5 books we've got a bit of a sandwich, so we've got the infancy narratives and then the passion narratives. But straight at the end of this passage, we go into chapter 26, when Jesus announces that the Son of Man is going to be handed over and crucified, and this is Passover time. So here we've got, at the beginning of the passion, straight after this, the announcement that the Son of Man is going to suffer and die, an ignominious death. But just before, at the beginning of this section, we've got the Son of Man coming in glory. So the two, how do they match up? The Son of Man coming in his glory, escorted by the angels, is probably referring to Daniel chapter 7, when the prophet Daniel has a vision, and he sees the Son of Man coming upon the clouds, and he will be receiving sovereignty, glory, and power. And here we have an exercise of this in this passage. Do you remember the very first verse repeats the word glory twice? So he's going to come in his glory, and he's going to sit on his throne, in other words kingship, a throne of glory. So we've got somehow a glorious kingship of Jesus in this teaching of his. When we look at the gospel as a whole, though, we've got other ideas of kingship. At the beginning, in the infancy narratives, we've got a hidden kind of kingship. We refer to David, as King David, as Jesus' ancestor. So his ancestral lineage is royal. And then what do the wise men seek when they come to Herod? We've come to worship the newborn King of the Jews. So there's an announcement right at the very beginning of Matthew's Gospel that Jesus is a king. And at the very end of the Gospel, when Jesus is crucified, what's the charge placed up against him on the top of his cross? King of the Jews. So it's the irony at the end of the Gospel that this little baby, yes, he's a king, but he's crucified because he's a king. Remember Pilate saying, so you are a king then. So at the end we've got confirmation that Jesus is a king, and the Son of Man, who is king, is going to be crucified, as we come on to the next bit here. But here we've got the kingship in glory. So Jesus at the end of his sermon on the end times, be prepared and so on, which is the last few bits that we've been having before this gospel, Jesus is saying, be prepared for my kingship. And my kingship is going to be one of justice, because I'm going to mete out judgment in eternal life. So the story goes on about judging, separating as a shepherd separates sheep from goats. Well, first of all, we got the idea of a shepherd. It's not just a pastoral scene, something that the people be familiar with. The idea of being a shepherd was also an image of the kingship in Israel. So kings were described as the shepherds who would shepherd their people. In fact, God himself, as we had in Psalm 23 there, is described as the shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. So he guides us and shepherds us, pushes us in the right direction. But the image there that we've got of the shepherd dividing sheep and goats, it's quite normal to have a flock including both. The sheep were worth more than the goats. But they were separated because the goats couldn't stand the cold at night. So the shepherd would separate them, and the goats would be put away somewhere a bit warmer, but the sheep, being woolly, were allowed to stay outside. So that's the kind of image that Jesus is giving, something that people will be used to, but also bearing in mind that shepherding is a role of kingship. Obviously, when we come to this text and we listen to it, the immediate thing we're thinking of is, yes, God is going to come as judge. We're going to die, and we're faced with the reality that we will be judged, and there are only two options, heaven and hell, and heaven might be via purgatory. So in this instance here, Jesus is giving us the criterion of judgment is going to be charity. The way we have shown charity, particularly to those in need. And it's selfless charity, not just doing something because I'm doing it for Jesus, or not just doing it because I'm going to be thanked by everybody and I'm going to be thought of as a great person because I've been charitable, but even doing it when no one else can see. And not just because we think, oh, it's going to be Jesus there, it's because they're in need. So it's giving of ourselves to others. And if we don't show charity, kindness to those in need, then there's the stark reality of judgment to eternal fire. That's the reading of this gospel passage as it comes straight to us. But there's another reading that we might find in the text, especially when we locate it within the whole of Matthew's gospel. So we've got a couple of word clues, if you like, to help us to understand what might also be going on in this passage. So first of all, we have the Son of Man. He's going to bring all the nations before him for judgment. But the nations, ethne, in Matthew's Gospel, always refers to the Gentile people. So there's a sense in which this is a judgment of the Gentiles and not a judgment of the Hebrew people. And also we find the reference to, insofar as you did it to one of the least of these brothers of mine. Now the word for brothers there is adelphos, like Philadelphia, loving the brothers, city of brotherly love. So adelphos there. In Matthew's Gospel, this refers to Christians, the followers of Christ. These are my people. So there is a possible sense in which this is a separate judgment of the nations, the non-Christians, if you like, and how they have behaved towards the Christians who are representatives of Jesus. And this fits in then with some of the early Christian teaching that we can find, that there will be two judgments. There's a judgment for the Hebrew people, or perhaps an extrapolation for the Christians, And then for the non-Christians. So we find that in Romans chapter 2 when Paul is talking about and there'll be judgment for the Jews first and then for the Greeks, or the Gentiles. We got it in 1 Corinthians, got it in Peter as well. So it's quite a common idea in the early church that there'd be two separate kinds of judgments. So when we look at it from that point of view, the emphasis is on us being another Christ. So to be the brother or sister of Christ, the adelphos there, is to say that we should consider ourselves as another Christ, how we should live. And that means in the way in which we relate to other people, and so on. So there are two different ways in which we could see this gospel, but both are reminding us of the reality that there will be judgment one day. That one day we'll be called to account for the way in which we've lived our lives.